What if I told you there's a style of football that completely ignores formations, where player positions don't matter and the entire team can abandon the right side of the pitch and create an overload on the left side? A style of play where chaos isn't just random, it's actually the entire point. It's called relationism, and if you've tried to build it in Football Manager, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't work, the game will fight you, your players will still stick to their normal positions, and you don't really see players overloading one side of the pitch like you do in true relationism. Your tactics still feels positional. That fluid, swarming chaos you see in real life, you can't seem to create it in Football Manager. Your tactic just falls apart and concedes easy goals from counter-attacks. Once you've had enough, you revert to a conventional 4-3-3 gig in pressing and convince yourself that relationism just doesn't work in the game. But what if I told you that it's not entirely true? What if we could create something that captures the idea of relationism, not a perfect tactic, but something that feels different from the normal tactics that we're already used to? A system that makes your players seek each other out, swarm the ball, create those beautiful chaotic patterns of play that's beautiful to watch and near impossible to defend against. What I'm about to share with you will change how you see tactics and Football Manager. But guess what? This is the first step to implementing relationism. We'll also look at why Football Manager has a hard time capturing relationism and how you can override the game's rigid systems to create something beautiful. So what exactly is relationism? Before we can break Football Manager, we need to understand what we're actually trying to build. And to understand relationism, we first need to talk about the opposite, positional play. In positional play, players occupy specific zones on the pitch. They maintain their shape. They create passing triangles through calculated positioning. It's kind of like chess, where the pieces can only move in certain squares, and some pieces cover more squares than others. Every player is responsible for their zone. Wingers stay wide, centre-backs protect the goalkeeper, and the midfielders cover the central areas and the half spaces. When players rotate, they do so within the confines of each zone. You rarely see a situation where a centre-back overlaps and there's no one slotting into his position to cover up for him. However, in relationism, this is not the case. You can have 5 or 6 players converging into a small area within 10 meters of each other while the rest of the pitch is somewhat empty. It's a risky approach, but this allows them to commit more bodies into any phase of the game. If they are pressing, they have more players to press in a small area. If they are moving the ball forward, they have more bodies to circulate passes and keep the opponent guessing. It looks beautiful to watch and even to imagine, but it's not easy to implement successfully. Like the great Johan Cruyff said, football is simple, but simple football is the hardest thing there is. To implement relationism successfully, we need to understand principles that make relationism work. The first principle is tokoi mevoi, what we know as pass and move. A player passes and immediately sprints forward into space, changing the entire picture for the defender. Now take note, this player making the run may not be an immediate receiver of the pass. A constant movement creates chaos for the opponent's defense. If he is the receiver of the second pass, relationism calls that principle tabela, meaning table in Portuguese. This is similar to pass and move, but it's in the form of a 1-2 pass, as if the player was kicking the ball against a wall or a table and the ball would just come back to him. The escadinha or little staircase is another principle that relationism thrives on. Here, players position themselves a few steps ahead of each other like a step ladder, making it easier for teammates to move the ball forward with short passing. However, the standout principle that represents relationism is the pitch tilt. Sorry I couldn't find a sweet Portuguese translation for this one, but it's the freedom for players to leave their designated positions and go closer to the ball, making them converge on one side of the pitch. This creates space on the other side for a quick switch of play. However, relationism hasn't been known to take advantage of that open space on the opposite side. It encourages teams to attack down the side where they have more players, making the pitch tilt and numerical superiority all the more important. So here's what makes relationism so different. In positional play, you can control space and move the ball through the space. In relationism, you ignore the space entirely. You follow the ball and you find your teammates and you improvise along the way. And when you lose the ball, all the players already crowded around it become an instant aggressive press. The touchline becomes an extra defender and that chaos becomes your strength. I used to think that this style of play is impossible in Football Manager because Football Manager doesn't really understand relationships. It understands zones, player roles, and player duties. The match engine is built on players returning to their positions, maintaining their shape, and following their tactical instructions. So how do we make relationism work? We work with the game's logic and not against it. We use everything Football Manager gives us, like player rules, player traits, and team instructions, to create the echoes of relationism. The goal of this video is to show you how to implement relationism in any tactic you create on Football Manager, not to recreate Fernando Diniz' tactic. Relationism is not a tactic in itself, it's a philosophy and a style of play. You see, Football Manager's match engine is fundamentally and structurally opposed to everything that relationism stands for. Player roles have their certain behaviors and patterns of movement. Even when you force the team to play down one flank, the wide player on the opposite flank is reluctant to deviate from his position. The out of possession shape makes it much harder, as players tend to fall back into their shape when they lose the ball. However, we can make adjustments to our base tactic to release our players from the shackles in the game. We can use specific player role combinations and player traits and tactical instructions to encourage the team to behave the way that we want. And to implement relationism, you don't need to tear out your main tactic and build a new one from scratch. No, you just need to make tweaks to your system that encourage freedom. One tweak you can make is to replace stationary roles with more dynamic roles. This could mean swapping a deep line playmaker to a roaming playmaker or regista if you're on FM24, or to a box-to-box midfielder if you're on FM26. Speaking of FM26, I noticed that the two DM formations require defensive midfielders to hold their position. That is why I recommend the box-to-box playmaker. However, if you want more freedom, move the DMs to central midfield and choose a different role. Wide central midfielder and wide covering central midfielder are very good for the relationism approach. However, if you're using two CMs, it helps to have an inverted wingback or playmaker wingback to slot into the DM position when the team is in possession. For player instructions, add room from position and close down more to every position possible. This helps remove the shackles of positional play and encourage your players to move from their designated positions. In the fullback position, I noticed traditional fullbacks are too positional for relationism. You can ask them to do basically anything, but the player is so defensive minded that out of possession their first instinct is to drop back and cover their position. So in that position, I opted for complete wingbacks and wingbacks on FM24, but feel free to use the expressive roles like playmaking wingback on FM26. I hear you saying, would these roles work for smaller teams or lower league teams? My answer is yes, but you have to watch the matches. If there's a problem, you change it. You have the freedom to do so. There are no rules. Fernando Diniz's Fluminense is not an elite team. However, they are pioneers of relationism, as we all know it. In Brazil, they may be better than average compared to other teams, but overall, they are not a super team. So feel free to try principles of relationism with your team, and if you don't enjoy it, go ahead and change it. In attack, free role is king here. It's the closest thing to relationism in Football Manager. This player goes wherever he wants. On the wings, it really doesn't matter which roles you select. Just be sure you can ask them to roam from position and also close down more. For the striker, the complete forward only exists on FM24. It's an ideal role for relationism. But on FM26, I like the false 9 and the deep line forward. However, you can use any role that you want. But be careful with the poacher and the target forward, as these guys spend a lot of time camping in the opposition's penalty box. The positive mentality is what I settled for. Attacking was a bit too much, too direct for this style of play. It didn't really allow enough rotations. This affects the tempo as well. Everything was just happening too fast. You want a low tempo to allow rotations happen and also to gain control of the game. On FM26, I did try dribble less instruction, and it brought an extra dimension of beautiful football that I hadn't expected from relationism. Although on FM24 we overdid it sometimes and it cost us. However, these instructions will encourage the touch and move, tabella and escadinha principles of relationism. The pitch tilt was a bit harder to implement. I didn't want to manually drag a player to one side, as this would defeat the purpose of relationism. So for pitch tilt, you just want to pick a flank to exploit, either left or right. And you can change this for every game and also change it during phases of the game. You want to look at the opposition's lineup and choose which flank you would like to dominate or exploit. If they have a weak right back and we have an explosive left winger, or our best players are on the left hand side, we can choose to exploit the left flank, forcing all the play there. Similarly, you can use the Fletch approach where you force the play down the flank where they have their best players, so you can go about dealing with them. Either way, just pick a side, then turn on the exploit flank, or that's either left or right that you choose, then turn on exploit flank for that side, and you can also enable look for overlap if you want. While doing so, you want to keep your attacking width on balance. It will change according to the team mentality. This is because width in Football Manager is somewhat tricky. If you choose the narrow width, your team will look to play through central areas and only see the flanks as a means to get there. However, if you choose wide attacking width, your team will stretch the pitch, making it harder to keep possession and gain control of the match. So I felt the best setting was to do nothing and allowing my players decide organically what to do. Turning on be more expressive and walk the ball into the box helped massively our relationism cause. Out of possession, we forced the press with a high press and a high defensive line, but to further force that pitch tilt, we used pressing traps to show the opposition out wide. This forced them to the wings as planned, where we could force the turnovers and win the ball. We didn't see the need to use counter-attacks, however when we lost possession, we went for the counter-press to try and win it back. We congested the midfield a lot because of the pressing traps show outside, but some stubborn teams did try to play through the middle, making us win possession easily in the central areas. It's been an adventure playing Relationism, and you realize there's so much more you can learn about the game when you do this. As for formations, I'll be honest, it didn't really matter. With Relationism, you want to be open to playing any formation while you're still implementing your Relationism principles in that formation. Give it a try and let me know what you think.